Welcome to True Reddit Reads. Today, I'm going to share with you a haunting story, not about ghosts or monsters, but about grief and how loss can twist into something far more dangerous. It begins with a father who lost his son in a tragic bus accident. From that moment on, he started seeing his boy's shadow in another child. What followed was a chain of events filled with tension, fear, and obsession, so terrifying that an entire community had to come together to protect one innocent kid. This isn't just a true Reddit story about pain and obsession, it's also about love, sacrifice, and how a community turned tragedy into hope. So join me as we walk through this chilling journey, from heartbreak to obsession to the legacy that still lives on. Chapter 1. The Tragedy Begins. I will never forget the day my brother Tyler died. It started out like any ordinary morning, but just a few hours later, everything in my family was shattered beyond repair. The bus that was taking Tyler to baseball practice lost control and slammed into a utility pole. Out of everyone on board, he was the only one who didn't make it, just because of the seat he chose, the one spot where the impact hit the hardest. When the police gave us the news, I watched my dad turn into someone I didn't recognize. He stood frozen at the crash site for hours, his hand pressed against the pole where Tyler's blood had dried, whispering the same words over and over in a voice that made my skin crawl. "Get up, champ. Coach needs you to get up." He wouldn't leave, not until the police physically pulled him away. At the time, I thought that was just the way a heartbroken father expressed his grief. But I didn't realize that moment was the beginning of something darker, something none of us could ever come back from. In the days that followed, Dad and I went through Tyler's trophies, his medals, and old game tapes. I thought it was our way of holding on to each other, of finding comfort in the memories while trying to survive the pain. ESPN replayed one of Tyler's games, and we just sat there in silence the entire time. No words, no conversation, just letting the memories drown us. I truly believed I understood what grief was, and that Dad was learning how to accept it too. But I was wrong. Dad never accepted it. To him, Tyler never really left. And in his twisted way of thinking, there would always be some way to bring his son back. I was too naive then to see the warning signs. But even in those early days, the seed of his obsession had already been planted. Chapter 2. The Crack in Our Family. At first, I truly believed my dad was trying to heal. After the funeral, he started going back to the baseball field, agreeing to coach the town's little league team. I remember telling myself, maybe this is good for him. Maybe this is how he'll let go. Watching him hold a bat again, guiding kids on their swings, and throws it, almost gave me a sense of relief. But then the strange signs started to show. Dad began lingering after practice, always near one particular boy. His name was Jeremy. And by pure coincidence, or maybe not, Jeremy was left-handed just like Tyler. I'll never forget one dinner when Dad suddenly stood up from the table. He mimicked a pitching motion, his eyes lighting up as he explained, "That kid has the exact same rotation Tyler had when he was 12. The same motion, the same breath." I just sat there, my chest tightening. But I forced myself to believe it was nothing more than coincidence, that Dad was simply being an over-enthusiastic coach. But it didn't stop there. Before long, Dad began showing up at Jeremy's house without warning. He'd bring gloves, bats, sometimes even brand new cleats, telling Jeremy's parents he just wanted to support this special talent. I remember gently warning him, "Dad, maybe you should give their family some space." But he only chuckled, waving me off. "They don't understand baseball. Marcus, they don't see what Tyler saw." That was the first time I realized what I was hearing wasn't the concern of a coach. It was desperation. It was clinging, like he was trying to bring my brother back through the body of another child. And that was the beginning of the invisible distance tearing through my family. I had already lost my brother, but little by little I was losing my father too. Chapter 3. When Jeremy became the new Tyler. I still remember the first time I heard my dad call the wrong name. He was standing on the field, his eyes locked on Jeremy as the boy pitched. Then with a voice full of excitement, Dad shouted, "That's it, Ty Perfect, son!" My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe I misheard, but when I looked up, I saw Jeremy turning his head in confusion, while Dad stood there smiling, like he was truly coaching Tyler again. That moment planted a fear inside me that wouldn't go away. And soon, the signs only grew worse. Jeremy started wearing Tyler's old cleats, the exact same pair, the exact same size. One evening in the car, Dad's hands were trembling on the steering wheel as he whispered to me, "Tyler is teaching me through him. Marcus, I can feel it." Hearing those words made me sick to my stomach. That night at dinner, I tried to confront him. I told him, "Dad, maybe this has gone too far," but he didn't look at me once. His eyes stayed glued to his phone, texting Jeremy's mom about a tournament he had signed the boy up for without even asking their permission. It didn't take long before the other parents started complaining. They said Dad kept pulling their kids aside just to compare them to Jeremy, insisting that Jeremy was special, that he was more like Tyler. I watched it all play out, my blood boiling, realizing that my father no longer saw Jeremy as a child. He saw him as a vessel, as Tyler reborn. And deep down, I knew we had passed the point of grief. This wasn't mourning anymore. This was dangerous. Jeremy, just 11 years old, was being dragged into a nightmare built from my father's obsession. Chapter 4. The First Confrontation. It was a Saturday night and I was mindlessly scrolling through TikTok when I suddenly heard my dad's voice echoing from the baseball field near our house. At first I thought I was imagining things, but when I stepped outside, my whole body froze. There he was, standing in the middle of the field, wearing Tyler's old glove, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Come on, Ty, you can do better than that." Jeremy was out there too, wearing the number 12 jersey that used to belong to Tyler. Tears streamed down his face as he sobbed, "I want to go home. I don't want to be here anymore." But my dad didn't hear him. Or maybe he didn't want to. In that moment, Jeremy wasn't Jeremy at all. To my father, he was Tyler brought back to life. I sprinted over and pulled Jeremy behind me. "Dad, stop this right now." "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. But my dad just looked at me with this radiant, broken smile. Tears ran down his cheeks as he trembled and said, "Marcus, don't you see Tyler's here? He's back. He's giving us a second chance." I held Jeremy close, whispering to him, trying to calm his shaking body. But my dad lunged forward, his voice cracking into a near scream. "Don't confuse him. You're ruining Tyler's chance." I had to push back with everything I had, just to keep him away, while Jeremy trembled in terror behind me. In that moment, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my other hand gripping Jeremy's arm tightly. My dad froze when he heard me speaking to the dispatcher. His face went pale, his eyes wild and empty. For a split second, guilt stabbed at me like I was betraying him. But then the truth hit me harder. No, he was the one betraying Tyler, betraying me by twisting grief into this sick obsession. When the police arrived, they found him locked in his car, clutching Tyler's old equipment like it was sacred. They had to drag him out as he screamed, begging them to believe that Tyler was back in Jeremy's body. That image, his face contorted, his voice raw with desperation. It's something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Chapter 5. The Model Patient. After that horrifying night at the baseball field, my dad was taken into psychiatric custody. I thought that would finally be the turning point, a chance for him to truly get the help he needed, and for Jeremy to finally be safe. When the doctors told me he'd be undergoing a strict psychological evaluation, I almost breathed a sigh of relief. For the first few weeks, everything seemed stable. I tried to go back to my life, returning to work more consistently, spending time with Jeremy's family, almost as if to apologize for the madness my father had dragged them into. For once I believed the system had done its job, and that maybe this time, my dad would actually get better. But less than a month later, my phone rang. On the other end was a soft, polite voice, a social worker. She told me that my dad had made remarkable progress. that he was cooperative in every therapy session, took all his medications on time, and even showed clear insight into his condition. And because of that, he was no longer considered a direct threat to the community. In other words, he was being released. I went numb. My mind raced back to the way he called Jeremy Tyler to the night he tried to rip that boy out of my arms. But on paper, he was now nothing more than a model patient. They even told me he'd admitted that Jeremy wasn't Tyler, that he had moved past the delusion. The day I saw him again, he walked toward me wearing his old jacket, with Coach Williams embroidered on the chest. He looked calm. He smiled softly, and he spoke slowly, clearly, as if rehearsed 100 times. I understand now, Marcus. Tyler is gone. Jeremy isn't him. I know that now. The words were perfect, measured, believable, exactly what anyone would want to hear. But when he put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed hard enough to hurt, I felt it. In his eyes, there wasn't acceptance. There wasn't peace. There was something else. Something colder. Something far more dangerous. Chapter 6. The Chilling Signs. I kept trying to convince myself that my dad was really recovering. He spoke slowly, ate on schedule, even texted me once to thank me for giving him a second chance. To anyone looking from the outside, he seemed stable. He seemed believable. But deep down, my instincts kept whispering something wasn't right. And then one afternoon, my instincts were confirmed. I followed him as he drove out of town. He pulled into a storage facility I'd never seen him visit before. My heart pounded when I saw his name listed on the tenant board. I waited until he left, then approached the manager. The man hesitated, almost like he'd already noticed something strange about my father, before finally unlocking the unit for me. What I saw inside nearly knocked me off my feet. The room was split in two. One half was frozen in time, a perfect shrine to Tyler, his bed, his pillow, his uniforms, trophies polished to a shine under the dim yellow light. The other half was a replica. But this one wasn't for Tyler. It was for Jeremy. Posters of Jeremy's favorite players lined the wall. On the desk sat a packed lunch and a brand new glove. Everything was carefully arranged to look like a real bedroom, except it wasn't Jeremy's. It was my dad's creation. Then I noticed a box on the shelf labeled Prospects. I opened it and my blood ran cold. Inside were printed photos of boys, not just Jeremy, but several others. All of them left-handed pitchers, all around the same age Tyler had been. Some of the pictures were clearly taken from a distance, on baseball fields, outside schools. Beneath each photo were detailed notes, height, pitching speed, game stats. My hands shook as I snapped pictures of every piece of evidence, and in that moment, the truth slammed into me. My dad had never stopped. He hadn't healed. He had only learned how to hide it better, how to become more careful, more dangerous. When I stepped out of that storage unit, the reality was clear. If I didn't do something soon, Jeremy would only be the next victim in my father's endless obsession. Chapter 7. When the community stepped in. After seeing that room in the storage unit, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. But confronting my dad directly was pointless. He was too good at hiding, too good at convincing outsiders that he was just a grieving father in recovery. If I stood alone, I would lose. And then little by little, small pieces started to surface. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor across from Jeremy's house, called me over one morning. She handed me a notebook she'd kept for 2 weeks, dates, times, every instance she'd seen my dad standing outside Jeremy's window still as a shadow. My skin crawled as I flipped through the pages, but I was grateful. She told me I once lived through years of being stalked by my own husband. I know what it feels like to be watched. Don't let that boy live through the same nightmare. Not long after Coach Tom's wife, who once thought I was just being dramatic, quietly handed me her phone. Saved inside were text messages from my dad, politely suggesting that Jeremy should spend the night after a tournament. The wording was formal, reasonable even. But as a mother, she admitted it made her blood run cold. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Parents began whispering to each other after practice. They realized my dad knew details. No one outside the family should know Jeremy's allergies, his schedule, his small habits. What once seemed like dedicated coaching was now unmistakably obsession. Even Sarah, my girlfriend, who had been the one to preach about second chances, found something that changed her mind completely. She stumbled across an old screenshot from Tyler's social media. In it, Tyler had once written, "Dad scared the Morrison kid again. Why is he so obsessed with left-handed pitchers reading that felt like a knife twisting in my chest?" My dad's obsession hadn't started after Tyler's death. It had been there all along. That was when we stopped acting alone and started acting together. Parents took turns watching practices. Pickup schedules were switched around without notice. Jeremy was never left alone. My friend DJ installed extra cameras around the neighborhood, and Mrs. Patterson taught me simple tricks to spot when someone was tailing me. For the first time since Tyler's death, I didn't feel like I was fighting by myself anymore. A small community was forming a wall around Jeremy, and I realized that this unity, the shared vigilance, was the only thing that might stop my dad from turning his obsession into another tragedy. Chapter 8: When the Mask Came Off. At first, I thought the community's support had built a strong enough shield, but my dad didn't give up. He only changed his approach. He stopped clinging obsessively and instead shifted into something far more terrifying: calmness, logic, a cold, calculated reasonableness that could fool anyone. He began showing up at parent meetings with a flawless appearance, his coaching jacket pressed, his voice soft, his manner steady and confident. He told everyone he had been through a crisis, but was recovering thanks to therapy. And some of the parents nodded in sympathy, because who doesn't want to believe in a story of healing? Worse, my dad started turning the spotlight onto me. He dug up old therapy notes from when I was a teenager, from the time Tyler broke his arm. Back then, I'd once admitted I felt overlooked, that Dad only cared about Tyler. Now he twisted those words into proof that I had always been jealous and that I was using my resentment to smear him. Even Sarah, my girlfriend, initially sided with him. She believed in recovery, believed I was letting old wounds cloud my judgment. But then one day, she found messages from him on her phone links to articles praising people who had overcome mental illness, laced with thank yous for believing in family and healing. That's when she realized she was being manipulated too. Meanwhile, Dad kept moving in silence. I discovered he had applied to rent an apartment just a few blocks from Jeremy's school. In the trunk of his car, I found receipts for brand new sports gear, every item in Jeremy's size. A teacher even called me one afternoon to ask why Jeremy's grandfather had shown up at school, asking for details about his grades. The breaking point came when I returned to my own apartment. Tyler's 3 trophies, which I normally kept on a shelf, had been arranged neatly on my table in the shape of a triangle. And in the middle lay the spare key to my place, the one I'd given my dad years ago. On my pillow was a rare baseball card he'd once given Tyler when he was 8. I knew for a fact it had been stored away in the unit. That meant he had been inside my apartment while I slept. There was no doubt anymore, my dad's mask as the model patient had come off. He wasn't the desperate, broken man people once pitied. He was something worse now, a careful, strategic manipulator who could make the whole world question his victims, and that I realized was far more dangerous than any outburst of madness could ever be. Chapter 9: Closing the Circle. After discovering that my dad had broken into my apartment, I knew it was time to turn vague fears into concrete action. If I kept waiting, there would come a day when Jeremy truly disappeared. So I gathered everything I had: photos of the storage unit, Mrs. Patterson's notebook receipts for the sporting goods, even a recording I'd made of Dad, casually letting slip details about Jeremy's upcoming vacation. Details only Jeremy's family should have known. Piece by piece, I compiled a thick file of evidence. When I finally handed it all over to Jeremy's parents, they nearly broke down in tears. They'd believed they were the only ones who sensed something was wrong. But in reality, an entire network had been quietly watching my father. Coach Tom admitted Dad had once suggested Jeremy should spend the night after a tournament, and his wife still had the text to prove it. Another parent recalled how Dad seemed to know their child's pickup schedule far too well. All the fragments we'd collected now formed a full picture. My father wasn't only obsessed with Jeremy, he was keeping tabs on multiple boys who happened to share Tyler's traits. That's when we decided to form a circle of protection. Parents took turns keeping watch, setting up a group chat to report anything suspicious. Practice schedules were kept secret until the last minute, with times and locations shuffled constantly to make it impossible for Dad to track. Parents with cars were reminded never to leave their kids alone, not even for a few minutes. Mrs. Patterson, with her hard-earned experience of being stalked in the past, taught us how to keep observation logs, how to switch routes without warning, and how to notice if we were being followed. DJ added more cameras along the streets, near the school and baseball field, uploading the feeds to the cloud so they couldn't be tampered with. At first, Dad didn't seem to realize he was surrounded. He kept playing the role of the recovered father, sipping coffee at local cafes, chatting politely with parents, even offering to drive kids to field trips. But as rejection piled up, his patience began to crack. One day, Jeremy's father confronted him directly outside a hardware store. "You need to stop. My son is not Tyler." My dad stood there, face calm as stone, before smiling faintly. "You're misunderstanding. I only want to help. Doesn't every parent want another set of eyes watching over their kids? I'm just doing what a good community should do." The words sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. And that more than any outburst sent chills through everyone listening. This wasn't the obvious madness of a broken man anymore. This was cold conviction. From that moment, I knew the circle had to tighten even further, because my father was no longer just a man out of control. He had turned his obsession into a calculated plan, and if we didn't act fast enough one day, Jeremy would vanish from all of us. Chapter 10. The Trap at the Campsite. I knew it was only a matter of time before my dad tried something reckless, and just as I feared, it started with notes left on my windshield. Small scraps of paper, each one scrawled with the same message: "This weekend camping. You know the place. Tyler is waiting." Every time I read one, a chill ran down my spine. That place. It was the campsite where he once forced Jeremy to wear Tyler's jersey, the night I'd called 911 to save him. There was no question he wanted me back there. Whether it was a ritual or a trap, I couldn't be sure. I told Jeremy's parents everything. They panicked at first, but eventually agreed to a plan. I would go meet him, but not alone. Mr. Patterson, the former Navy officer who lived across the street, volunteered to come with me. He'd stay in contact with the other parents and the police while I kept Dad talking. Meanwhile, the others would keep Jeremy safe. When I arrived, the sight nearly stole the breath from my lungs. In the clearing, 2 tents were already set up, one adult-sized, the other clearly for a child. Next to them sat Tyler's old sports bag and a table lined with Jeremy's favorite snacks. The whole scene looked less like a camping trip and more like a twisted version of a family reunion. Then Dad emerged from the trees. He looked thinner, his eyes burning bright. A wide grin stretched across his face. "You came, Marcus. Now we can all be together again, Tyler, Jeremy, and us. All you have to do is open your heart." By the fire, he had built something that made my skin crawl. A makeshift altar photos of Tyler mixed with photos of Jeremy championship trophies, baseball cards all arranged in a circle around flickering candles. It felt more like a ritual than a campout. I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out Tyler's old journal, the one I had never read aloud before. In it, my brother had written about the pressure, the fear, the suffocating weight of our father's expectations. My voice shook, but I read every word. Dad snapped. He screamed, denying it, lunged to grab the journal, then collapsed to his knees, sobbing. For the first time, I saw him shattered, stripped of the mask. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was broken. And while he clutched his head and howled, the police moved in thanks to the coordinates Mr. Patterson had quietly relayed. They bound his wrists as he roared that I was killing Tyler a second time. As they dragged him away, there was a flicker, just a flicker of clarity in his eyes. He looked at me and whispered, "Tyler gone, Roy. Tyler is gone. For words. 4 words that broke me. It was the first time he ever admitted the truth, but by then, it was far too late. Chapter 11. The Ending and the Healing. That day they didn't take my dad home. They took him straight into mandatory psychiatric treatment. This time was different. There was no way out. Tyler's journal, the photos from the storage unit, the campsite he'd staged for a new family, even the GPS tracker he'd tampered with, all of it was undeniable. The court had no choice but to order his long-term confinement. Jeremy was reunited with his parents in tears. They clung to him as if letting go for even a second might mean losing him forever. Watching that, I finally felt a weight lift off my chest, though it didn't erase the heaviness completely. Things could have ended so much worse, and the community, it didn't scatter after the ordeal. If anything, it became stronger. Together, we started a scholarship fund in Tyler's name for kids who loved baseball but couldn't afford the chance to play. Jeremy's parents were the first to donate. We wanted Tyler remembered for his passion, not for the twisted obsession that had poisoned our family. Time moved forward. Slowly, I learned how to live without that constant edge of fear. Sarah and I eventually married in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and the families who had stood with us in protecting Jeremy. For the first time, I felt like I was stepping out of the shadow of the past. 2 years later, I sat in the bleachers and watched Jeremy pitch. He stood tall on the mound, not trying to be Tyler, not carrying anyone else's ghost, but simply himself. Each throw was strong and confident, free of the burden my father had tried to chain him to. I sat there, and peace finally washed over me. Tyler would always live in my heart, but Jeremy was free to write his own story. Our community, once just a fragile, invisible fence, had grown into a lasting bond, a network of protection and support. And my dad, he remains in treatment. This time he takes his medication, he attends therapy, and the letters he sends are different. Real apologies. No more blame, no more mention of Jeremy, just acceptance. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him, but I do know the dangerous cycle has been broken. And as I watched Jeremy throw his final pitch of the game, I realized his freedom, our community's safety, and the memory of Tyler's love for the sport had finally come together into the ending we all deserved. Chapter 12. Tyler's Legacy. After everything, I came to realize that pain never truly disappears. It only changes shape, becoming something that can either destroy you or heal you. With Tyler, we chose the second path. The scholarship fund in his name grew faster than I could have imagined. At first, it was just a few families pitching in, but soon, people who had known Tyler parents, who loved the game of baseball, even strangers who read about our story, all began donating. Because of that, dozens of kids were able to buy gloves, cleats, or simply pay the fees that let them join a league. Every time a scholarship was awarded, I made sure to tell Tyler's story. Not the dark part, not the obsession or the tragedy, but the story of a boy who loved baseball, whose eyes lit up every time he stepped on the field, who never gave up even in the smallest of games. I wanted those kids to know that Tyler wasn't just the boy in the accident. He was an example of spirit, of effort, of heart. Jeremy became part of that legacy too. Now a confident teenager, he often volunteers to help the younger kids just starting out. He doesn't try to be Tyler. He has his own style, his own throw, his own passion. Watching him laugh and play on the field, I know he's finally living for himself, no longer under the shadow of anyone else's expectations. My father remains in treatment. He spends his days in therapy and woodcraft classes, making small carved pieces. In one of his letters, he wrote that he wanted to donate them to raise money for Tyler's fund. I don't know if that's genuine remorse or just his way of seeking peace, but I chose to accept it because Tyler's legacy doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to every child who now has the chance to chase a dream. When I sit by Tyler's grave and tell him about the new kids receiving scholarships, I feel for the first time in years my chest isn't so heavy. Tyler is still here, in the sound of a ball smacking into a glove, in the laughter of children running across the field, in the unity our community built out of tragedy. That is how a memory truly lives on, not by replacing it, not by obsessing over it, but by letting love become opportunity and loss become hope. And that is Tyler's true legacy. And that's the whole story. A journey of tragedy obsession, and in the end, a kind of release. A father who lost everything because he couldn't face the truth, and a community that found a way to turn pain into strength, creating a legacy to honor Tyler. What moved me most was seeing Jeremy step onto the field with his own style free, no longer defined by the past. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Reddit Reads so you won't miss the next powerful Reddit drama. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most chilling stories don't come from fiction, but from real life.